Okay, so as Bron said, really stoked to be here. Thank you so much to the Dentons team, Carolyn, Joy, everyone else. Really appreciate you making us welcome in your lovely office. And hopefully everyone can now see
the Menti.
The Menti. All right, I'm just double checking. Yep, all right, I know Bronwyn's got the autopilot in there. So let's get to it, hey?
Let's get underway.
So Bron, I'll hand straight over to you.
Okay, so, and look, we circulated quite a lot of reading ahead of this session today. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to at least have a glance at some of that. Just simply because there is so much information out there at the moment about generative AI and in particular ChatGPT, which has really taken the world by storm. And so what we're showing you now is just some really interesting insights from various key players around the world on their take on generative AI and some of the models that are out there. So suffice to say, generative AI and in particular ChatGPT has changed the global landscape. So in terms of impact, you could liken it to the telephone, the internet, email, and social media, and none of us can imagine our lives without these things now. So the genie is out of the bottle and organisations are now in a position of working out how they use this new thing. Do they use it? And if they do use it, how do they use it safely? There seems to be polarised views on this. Some organisations are running towards it at a rapid pace, and others are being more risk averse. There are also recognised flaws in the tools, some have which has seen court cases started to progress. So there's been issues with hallucinations, where the generative AI makes up information if it doesn't know the answers, and there's also been some breaches of privacy. In addition, fraudsters and scammers have now moved quickly into the space, and there are instances of the use of generative AI for a new variety of frauds, including cloning voices and superimposing faces onto videos. So I think that we're right to really investigate how, as an organisation, we use this. It's probably too late to say we're never going to use it, because I think that that horse has bolted. So now is the time to work out how do we do this safely and appropriately and in an ethical way.
And just to add to Bron's commentary, there was a quote that we found during the week that I thought kind of captures this really well. So it's from Andrew McAfee from MIT in the US, where he says that for more than 250 years, the fundamental drivers of economic growth have been technological innovations. The most important of these are what economists call general purpose technologies. So they include steam engine, electricity, and the internal combustion engine. So for our generation, the most important general purpose technology will likely to be AI, but particularly machine learning. And so I think what's important to note here is that even though ChatGPT has suddenly blown itself into the public, I guess the faces of public very quickly.
The stratosphere.
That's right. Just like the steam engine. The steam engine was around for about 60 odd years before it made its way into mainstream production. Let's call it mainstream industrial society. Similarly, AI has been around for quite some time. It's just for some reason, ChatGPT seems to have suddenly captured the public consciousness. And another thing to remember as well is that we've noticed recently that organisations have wanted to take a really super risk-averse posture to AI. We're going to, I guess, debate the pros and cons of that today. But I think it's important to remember that even the word risk itself, what I love about it is it comes from a French word which actually sort of loosely translates to run into danger. And so I think in this day and age, we can't afford to run into danger when it comes to AI, but we certainly want to make sure that we run into the opportunities and the benefits that AI can bring us through this machine learning, through productivity enhancement, through all of those things. So look, we'll hand over to Joy and Carolyn now. Just as usual, I think most of us here know the rules of the place. So it's camera on and mic off in this case, because we don't want to all sound like we're in the outside lav. Chatham House rules, that just means what goes on tour stays on tour. Please contribute to the discussion and be respectful of each other and have fun and don't take yourself too seriously. So I will now hand over to Joy and Carolyn. So thank you, ladies.
Myself.
Yep. Okay. On now. You go.
All right. Thanks, James. Can everyone hear online? Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Before we start the substantive content, and thank you, James, I'd just like to start by recognising the stories, traditions and living cultures, and in the spirit of Denton's commitment to reconciliation and unification, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and their connections to land, sea and community, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. The next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so we're talking about generative AI and legal considerations for the workplace. Probably no great surprise seeing we're all in a legal office at the moment, but we will deviate from that so that it's a more inclusive discussion. But I thought it would be useful, we can probably skip over the contents more. I thought it would be useful for us to start back at the very beginning, and we all have different bases to start our knowledge in relation to what AI is and certainly what this iteration of generative AI is. And comparatively, traditional AI systems are used to make predictions and observations by analysing data. And what we're seeing with generative AI is that it's a type of technology that produces new content, which is based on input prompts. So that is a differentiation there. It responds to prompts responds to prompts rapidly and in a gradual manner. So there's the machine learning piece there that I think we're all coming to terms with in relation to how we're using AI and generative AI in our business. Could you flick to the next slide, please? Yeah. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you. So we're going to have a little look at ChatGPT. Understanding there's lots and lots of models in the market, but ChatGPT was developed by OpenAI. It's a chatbot that produces a human-like text response to natural language prompts. And it uses that machine learning or deep learning to build generative neural networks that evolve with use. So it's trained on really large data sets to learn and predict patterns of natural language and to recognise content prompts. And we'll get to that hallucination piece, which Bronwyn has alluded to, because it's terrifying. What it also does is use algorithms to process data and identify areas of response improvement. I probably should just pause there too, understanding we've got audio issues at the presentation point. If there are questions during the course of this, we'd really encourage that in the chat so that we don't spend the whole time just talking at you, and there can be more fluid discussion. So certainly what we're seeing in terms of from our clients and in terms of the industry uses of ChatGPT, understanding that we live in a bubble in the legal profession, we're seeing it used across a range of things. So in legal services, it's assisting us with research, and we were just having quite a discussion about the fact that as partners of firms, we'd like to know when it might be being used for research and when what we're getting is actually human input. Preliminary legal drafting, precedent creation and correspondence drafting, and that obviously extrapolates over into all manner of professional services. In IT, we're seeing it in programming, code creation, diagnostics and troubleshooting. In retail, and we'll touch on this when Joy steps into the IP side of ChatGPT and AI, we're seeing logo and image creation, and that has some pros and cons, which we'll explore. Inventory and stock analysis, automated client inquiry responses and website tools, website chatbots. In fintech, and this is where the regulation hasn't caught up yet, we're seeing it used in personalised advice drafting, and that might be an oxymoron if it's not properly personalised. Data analysis, fraud detection, and automated applicant approval in banking and financial services scenarios. And then in banking, we're seeing it do financial forecasting, credit analysis, account security, and customer service. So that's all really interesting and really useful. I think some of the challenges come back to the gaps in the knowledge or the machine learning of the AI device. So there's lots of limitations and risks. And I do like that we run towards risks. So in terms of the risks, and this is something that is paramount for us as legal service providers, is the lack of security over client information. So understanding what's been fed into ChatGPT or any bot, understanding where that content might go, understanding how it may be reproduced or used for learning when what we're doing is perhaps prompting it with the secrets of others. The other risks include the black box algorithm. So there's uncertainty around decision making. And we've had long discussions in terms of machine learning and unconscious bias or prompts that lead to adverse outcomes.
So what black box means?
Yeah, so it talks about we put it all into the algorithm and we don't know what necessarily comes out.
Okay.
Or how it's generated and what it spits out. Correct. Thank you. So it's highly fallible to inaccuracy and that hallucinations, and we'll touch on that later. The other risk we really see is complacency. So there's a greater chance of complacency in terms of the type of prompts that are placed into it, and this complacency around the fact that if we've asked a computer, the computer is right. So we've got a generation of younger practitioners in law, and I don't fall into that category anymore, who grew up with Google. And Google has produced correct answers for them, or at least a sounding board. Google doesn't hallucinate. ChatGPT does. So if we go to data-driven versus machine learning. So I think the risks feed into the limitations. So ChatGPT doesn't accurately yet, and it may at some point in the future understand language nuances. We've got that training period. So I think ChatGPT is about September 2021 is it when it started learning, although there are other AI pieces that go further down the line in terms of where they started learning from the internet. Quite often they can struggle to emulate correct tone. And I think we've all had experiences where your emails have been misinterpreted based on tone. This is a next level of computer tone. And then there's inaccuracy in terms of prompt replication. So you can use the same prompts in the same order and generate a different response.
So that lack of security over client information, is that about if you put information into the generative AI, is it freely available to use that information for other people? Is that?
Yeah, so it may not be freely available. Oh, there we go. Knowledge cutoff for ChatGPT is now January 22. Thank you, Cole. It may not be explicitly available in the form in which you gave it, but it forms the basis of the learning. So if I use a really corporate lawyer example, if I was reckless enough to use inside information from one of my listed companies to somehow generate a response or a memo, although that information, ASIC would have something to do with, have something to say about that. Although it may not be available in exactly the form that I've given it the prompt, it will form part of the learning. So this is about not giving away your clients' trade secrets or indeed systems or processes that might be unique to an organisation because you've asked the bot to rewrite a paragraph so it's more easily read by a tradesperson on the ground. So there needs to be some thought around what we're training it with and what we're giving away. And we'll talk about that later when we chat more broadly, because it might not have even been ours to give away in the first place. All right, hallucinations. We talk about this a lot because it's actually really problematic. So hallucination in AI refers to the system's tendency to fabricate information where it doesn't know the correct answer. So those out. Anyone with children will understand what a hallucinated output looks like. So they're often rationally correct in terms of pattern, but they lack accuracy. So it's like dealing with a 3-year-old. So platforms like ChatGPT don't acknowledge the flaw. So the disclaimer is that the algorithm may be subject to error. And as lawyers, we find quite a difference between errors and making it up. So examples of hallucinating include manufacturing citations, and there was that well-publicised case before the judiciary in the US where the cases that were presented to the judge didn't actually exist. Producing outdated or false authorities, misrepresenting facts and applying instructions incorrectly. So that's a real challenge in terms of just the work product that's produced. And also in terms of safety, if what you're using this for in a more practical sense for those who don't work in professional services are producing manuals or instructions, that if they're not sanity checked, there may be things that are missing.
And I think, sorry, I think Carolyn, you had mentioned this morning potentially randomly reordering sequences within patterns.
Within patterns, that's right.
No specific reason. I think for the WHS people, that's really important to consider.
Correct.
Yeah. It's saying it's utterly unreliable.
At the moment, yes.
For the person to find it.
Yeah, well, yes. I think that yes, I'm showing my age now. Yes, I would fire them. I'm really mindful my whole team's in the room at the moment. I feel like they might be well trained enough, but I'll take that up afterwards. So in terms of our increased reliance, and I don't think we can shy away from this, Bronwyn and James are entirely correct, that it's here. At Dentons, we've got our Dentons UK office have got their own model that they're testing internally at the moment to deal with that client secrecy piece. Here in Australia, we've run a trial. Some of my team were on that trial. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what the output of that trial was just yet. Nothing so far. So it's here. And I think certainly it's highly monitored in professional services, and it may not be as highly monitored in other organisations. But what it will do, which I think is positive, is create that stronger baseline of a first draft for work, which frees up time to spend more time to focus more on, you know, getting it to picture perfect for your organisation. So there'll be efficiencies in this without a doubt once we get over the hurdles, or at least understand what we're looking for in terms of filling the gaps. We do need to this is a little bit like the ABC fact check piece, so we may need to have those teams. So one of the challenges with that is it might increase employee capacity, which will raise workload expectations. And I think for some of us, increased workload expectations might not be possible at this point. It will shift the focus from content creation to checking and reviewing. So that fact-checking piece, I do think, will come into play, and that will change the nature of the work that we're expecting people to do. But there'll be a greater emphasis on that due diligence, fact-checking and verification of material. What that's going to lead to is new policies, I think, is the reality. So in terms of reg, like everything, the regulation has not caught up with the technology. We recognise and resemble those remarks. So at the moment, we're really dealing with things that already exist. So the Privacy Act, the Copyright Act, the Trademarks Act and the Patents Act. There is some industry self-regulation and co-regulation. That doesn't necessarily all go that well in Australia most of the time. There are the OECD principles on artificial intelligence, which are a useful place to start. And the e-Safety Commissioner has guidelines and recommendations that assist with that. So I thought I'd talk about what we're seeing in terms of what our boards are contemplating. So what's keeping them up at night at the moment in relation to this? Authorship and ownership of anything IP related. So understanding what the assets of the company are or your organisation are. Because as Joy will talk to, there are real issues around copyright and authorship of documents that are produced using artificial intelligence. The privacy and concerns and data protection are things that would keep everyone up at night, full stop, but we're in a new realm on that front. The safety element is the content generated fit for purpose. So there's no, we've produced this and let's run off with it. It needs to be fact checked. The unconscious bias in training and learning, I don't think has properly been explored yet, that we're looking for much more material on that. We know that machine learning in its more traditional sense that we've been dealing with for the last 20 years has unconscious bias based on the inputs that have gone into it. What we have with a broader ChatGPT model is many more, it's modern day Wikipedia, and we all know we can't use that as a source of truth. Which means it's vulnerable to inaccuracy and false or misleading outputs with no liability. So there needs to be,
Who's liable?
yeah, so who is liable if ChatGPT has learnt something incorrectly,
Mm.
and then continues to output it and continues to learn on top of it all. So this is a bit fake news.
And isn't that the issue of a couple of the court cases in the US at the moment, is that the Federal Trade Commission are asking organisations, how are you training, or what information are
You training your machines with?
Yes,
Yeah, correct.
That's the issue.
Correct. Because one would imagine that if we take countries for example, a machine taught in the UK may behave very differently to a machine taught in Russia or North Korea or Australia. That the inputs, there's no base level for inputs.
Defamation.
Yeah, and then defamation. So that absolutely producing that. So if you've generated it and you publish it, is there a defamatory piece that goes with that?
Mm.
And the answer is
And if ChatGPT spits it back at someone else.
yep.
Mm.
Who's publishing?
That's right.
All right, Joy, over to you. I'll mute myself so you've got that.
Thanks, Caroline. Hello, everyone. I'm Joy Atakador. I lead our intellectual property and technology group here at Dentons. And without a doubt, generative AI is profoundly challenging and revolutionising the way we do business. We talked a little bit about ChatGPT, which is a conversational AI chatbot developed by OpenAI, and that was launched in November 2022. And it's funny, in the practice of law, I'm now seeing ChatGPT increasingly used in my space. So I attended the International Trademark Attorney Conference in Singapore very recently, and we were having really robust debates about the merits and dangers of using ChatGPT. And this was in the context of drafting patent specifications. And one of the patent attorneys I was talking to from Germany said he's regularly using the app to help him draft claims of a patent. And his philosophy is that if all of us as lawyers, are using ChatGPT, he wants to be able to add value and be advising clients on more complex issues of strategy and negotiation. So that was an interesting insight, I thought, from a law firm perspective. I was just having an interesting conversation with my youngest son the other night, and he said to me, "Mum, do you know this song, Nothing's Gonna Change My Love for You, by George Benson," which, anyone of my vintage knows was popularised by Glenn Medeiros. But if you haven't seen it, I suggest you take a look. But it's a new AI version of that song is trending on TikTok, and it sounds like Justin Bieber. I've got a little bit here if you want to. I would have thought that was Justin Bieber, and that's pretty insane. If you're
generated by
AI generated,
Oh,
and you can actually say a song in the style of, and be able to generate musical works in that manner. And it's not a wonder why Hollywood is on strike at the moment. So I thought I'd just run through a few of the major IP challenges I can see with generative AI, and in summary they're up on the slide there. But first, we talked a bit about hallucinations and the fact that there is a lot of a challenge where ChatGPT, for example, can hallucinate based on the predetermined inputs and produce incorrect answers. And Caroline mentioned that Manhattan Federal Court judge where fake legal precedents were used in a personal injury lawsuit against an airline. I can guarantee it's frightening, but I guarantee you no Denton's lawyers will do that. And just in the context of confidential information and privacy, let's talk a little bit about that. So a major issue is that if you really need to be very careful in not inputting sensitive, confidential and private information and other valuable IP in the course of, for example, a chatbot like ChatGPT. So the system will train itself with that information and could produce an input and an output disclosing commercially sensitive information of your business. So if the right question is asked, your sensitive information might be disclosed. Another thing you need to consider is copyright infringement. So potentially, if you reproduce text that has been created by ChatGPT, and I know it's a very powerful tool, you could potentially infringe another person's copyright. There's every potential that a response generated by ChatGPT actually reproduces a third party's copyright material that has been imported in to train the system. And so at the moment, we've got a couple of cases on foot. There's best-selling authors Mona Awad and Paul Tremblay, and they've taken a lawsuit against OpenAI, claiming that their books were used to train ChatGPT without their consent, and they're taking a copyright infringement action at the moment. And that will raise very interesting issues as to whether when you use an output from ChatGPT, there has been a reproduction of a substantial part of a copyright work. I am interested to know what everyone thinks about whether in Australia we should have a fair use exception for using copyright work to train generative AI. Possibly, no at the moment, because we don't really have really good regulations around it. But, there is something to be said that as we move into more sophistication and regulation around these AI systems, that perhaps we actually need to think about having a fair use exception because it's for the greater good. Interested to know what people think about that, and feel free to put your comments in the chat. Another issue I wanted to talk about was the fact of you might assume that if you've used an AI product, and you've used a lot of your own money and expense in the research and development of that you would be entitled to IP protection of some sort. So, for example, you could invest a considerable amount of money in research to develop an invention, but what I can tell you is that you won't be able to get patent protection for that invention if really that was produced by using an AI machine. So in December last year, the High Court of Australia upheld a case, it's the Dr. Thaler case, and it upheld that an AI system couldn't be named as an inventor of a patent. Similarly, in the context of copyright, an AI-generated artwork or a literary work may not be able to be protected by copyright, as I'll illustrate on the next slide. So you'll see there an image of someone who looks probably familiar to you. It very much looks like the actress Zendaya. So just by way of context, unlike in the US, in Australia, we don't have a copyright register system. Copyright subsists upon the creation of an original artwork or an original literary work. But in the US, there is a system to register your copyright. So it was recently reported in a US case that a person named Chris Castanova entered prompts into an AI art generator app called Midjourney, and she created a graphic story called Zaraya of the Dawn. And the result of that was an 18-page story about a character who resembles the actress Zendaya. And Castanova was held to be the owner of copyright in the text and the compilation, but not the images. And the US Copyright Office held that Castanova couldn't be the owner of the copyright in the images because they were computer generated. And Castanova didn't have sufficient control over the ultimate output. So I thought that was a very interesting position from our US colleagues, and could be applied also in an Australian context if you were trying to establish that you owned copyright in, for example, website material or photographs or artworks that have been generated for your business. So the lesson here is that if you're creating artworks and literary works, manuals, any potential inventions, you really need to make sure that you keep a very good records of creative efforts in terms of human input. In case you ever need to evidence that you want to protect IP of some sort, you'll need to establish that there has very much been human input, at least under our current IP laws. On the next slide, we have this image. Funny, this Thaler guy resurfaced to claim IP protection over this image. So this was a case where the image was wholly computer generated, and the US Copyright Office, again in this instance, refused copyright registration for this image. And the US Copyright Office held that it was not a work of human authorship because copyright protects only works of human creation. And on the next slide, just to take this home, this point, this is an image that was created by the generative AI platform Midjourney, and it was created using hundreds of input prompts by a guy named Jason Allen. And the painting won the 2022 Colorado State Fair's annual fine art competition in September last year. And so the US Copyright Office found that theatre d'opera spatial couldn't be protected by copyright as the work wasn't produced by a human. So this brings me to my last point, and it's a practical issue, and I'm interested to know Caroline's views on this as well. But if AI is used to generate valuable research, data, processes, and other works, this will have massive implications when it comes to selling or commercializing or acquiring the assets of a business. So, I mean, my take on it is you need to keep a register of how business critical, literary, artistic, and musical works are generated. I think that's absolutely crucial. And it's also important to consider how the works are created, how much creative control you want to make sure is exercised over the ultimate output to be able to potentially demonstrate copyright ownership. So those are my thoughts on the IP issues.
And just before we hand back to Carolyn, just wanted to address Joy. Yeah, Cole was saying that he saw some Stable Diffusion printouts at an art gallery in Nelson Bay a little while ago, and the owner, he asked the owner how they valued these digital prints versus the real things on display, and they didn't know they were generated with text.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really interesting.
Well, I mean, I personally think that if you were if there's a lot of involvement in putting prompts in, I mean, that theatre d'opera spatial one is a classic example of how much input an artist can actually put in. So I think we'd probably consider moving along that there might potentially be protection at some stage with an acknowledgement that AI is being used to generate this type of very beautiful work. Yeah.
Seems the definition of creation needs to be addressed a bit. So
So just maybe then, Caroline and Joy, we might be able to even get to some of the questions, because I think that whilst we've all now got these concerns, the genie is out of the bottle. So how can we use it safely, and what can we actually use it for? Is it just straight data analysis? What do you use generative AI for there?
I think if you're talking to the really conservative lawyers, we're not using it at all. There you go. So I do think that we will be the last industry to most fulsomely adopt it. And if there's any other lawyers on the call that, Chris, if you think you're using it more frequently than perhaps we're using it in big law at the moment, I'd be delighted to hear that. But I do think we're laggards in terms of tech. Our clients, I was going to say, as evidenced by our presentation issues today. So I don't know that we're going to be market leaders on this. I think it's going to be used. I think it can be used really, really effectively in data-driven processes.
Can I add something to that,
Yes.
Caroline? I should say that Dentons globally is piloting.
I was just about to say that.
Yes, sorry, you go.
But some of our colleagues indeed have. So Dentons UK have got their own machine, as I alluded to before. It'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that. That is something we can train with a base of information that belongs to Dentons.
Well, it's an absolute game changer.
It's an absolute game changer. Yeah. So there are many firms doing that in the legal space. I imagine there are many other organisations that are doing exactly the same thing, so that they're holding their own trade secrets or their own confidential information in something that's more contained. In a perfect world, we'd get to almost like an open source coding piece where the whole world could learn from each other. And I think we've without using the COVID word too frequently, we've seen the power of, if the whole world comes together and works on a problem, we can have amazing results, but we're not quite there yet. And I think everyone's still trying to get the regulation to catch up to the reality of what we're faced with. And it's not the first time this has happened, but we've dealt with this with other disruptive technologies where the regulation has come much later. But if I come back to the conversation of, if you're buying a company or selling a company or trying to claim ownership in something and it's been generated by AI, what the market's really grappling with at the moment is, in a normal transaction, we see warranties and indemnities around things that we own or things that are mission critical or business critical. And in many large transactions, or even some smaller ones, often those warranties and indemnities are insured. So the insurers are grappling with what representations can be made. companies and their officers are grappling with what are the assets of the company, and do the systems and processes that have been generated using machine learning, if they can't be copyrighted and there is no register in Australia, what proposition are we looking at in terms of at least documenting that? Because if you're buying a business, you want to take all of the things with you. You want to know you own them as well.
Yeah. Makes me think about one-off insurance and all that. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
The whole world is driven by insurance. Just in case that was unclear.
So if I'm a HR manager, a risk manager, a safety manager, can I safely use generative AI to say, write my policies and procedures? Hopefully everyone heard that question.
Yeah,
I want to see ChatGPT write policy about how to use ChatGPT.
Yeah. So I don't know if everyone heard that, but Kyla in the room wants ChatGPT to write the policy about using ChatGPT, and at least understand what those terms look like. We might run that as an exercise. Yeah, I think so. It's a challenge.
I think so I recently had one of my juniors in my team. I said, I need to know about that 500 page case. Stick it in ChatGPT and just give me a summary. And I think that could be incredibly useful in terms of the use of his time. And it's just maybe about fact checking and making sure that you've spot check that, just from a pragmatic point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as professionals, if we're using it internally and then using it, making sure we fact check it before it forms the basis of anything substantial, then that is a good use of time. Robodebt is an example of this, where it can be used for evil.
Well, can I even take it back a step further? And it might be more of an ethical dilemma. I just don't. I don't like this all care, no responsibility attitude that these providers, like we were talking about this, they kind of go, well, if you created AIDS as a virus or whatever, and then you just really release it into the world, oh, well, it's not my problem now, what do you do with it, kind of thing. It just feels something about the way they just kind of go, oh, we just created it, it's not our problem if someone uses it nefariously type line that they run. Something feels very ethically grey about companies that they're trying to go, and we'll reap the multi-billion-dollar benefits of it.
It's not dissimilar to all of the Senate inquiries we've seen, the inquiries we've seen in the US around the Facebook advertising or the echo chambers that creates in terms of the machine learning on pages that you've liked or things that you've engaged with. So it's a variation on that theme, but with much broader application.
I think we're just lagging behind. I mean, there's certainly AI regulations in the UK which focus on risk level assessment. So I think there is a review at the moment, and we're trying to be able to regulate the sort of AI apps and get there, but we're just not quite there yet. Yeah.
And I think for many directors and officers, what it will come down to is, even if you've got a document that's been generated by AI, so if we take a workplace health and safety manual or even a disclosure document for a capital raising, ultimately at the end, what's going to happen is that the obligations on the directors and officers is not going to change, because there's legislation that deals with that, and we need to go through the process to make sure that the information is correct and has been verified and can be relied on. So it's an upstream obligation to do that fact checking. It's just knowing what's happening lower down the chain and how that material is being produced before it's produced to the board or to the senior manager. So if your risk assessment's been entirely generated by AI with no fact checking, as a workplace health and safety professional, you probably want to know about that.
It's not entirely dissimilar to the risk you have now with junior staff who may or may not be properly supervised, really.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say that the junior person you hired, who you gave the boring task of producing X policy to, didn't make it all up in the first place. And
yeah, fair. That is fair. So yeah.
Found one online, copy pasted it, and might still have the other company's name in it.
Sorry.
We've borne the wrong end of that from other legal providers, Carolyn. So yeah, that's a different
Also
story.
not a Denton's issue.
Yeah,
Daniel, you had a question.
Yeah, Daniel's wanting to jump in. Oh, I don't think, can we hear you? Okay, hang on. Sorry, do you want to go again, Daniel? Because I think we just lost the audio.
Daniel, have you got a question?
Or do you want to pop it in the chat instead? That might be easier. If there's an audio issue.
I think you're just far away from your microphone, that's all. So
just with the question in the chat box, and then we'll go from there, Daniel.
Pre-submitted, Caroline, that
There are a couple. Sorry, I'll just get them up on the other device because we're having all of the tech issues today.
Yeah, that's right. And we feel like it is very fitting that the AI session had a number of tech challenges.
Sorry, if you're hearing a bit of banging, that's building works happening near our office, unfortunately.
All right. So I think we probably touched workplace health and safety. So one of the questions was, what would we use generative AI for safety in the workplace? And in the perfect lawyer response, Joy and I are both going to say we're IP and corporate lawyers and therefore can't give advice on workplace health and safety. But in more generic terms, I think the things that we're seeing in the literature that we've reviewed is that it can be used for things like risk reduction, real-time monitoring, predictive analytics, training and efficiency. And I did chuckle as one of my very clever staff members moved on the predictive analytics and the real-time monitoring as we moved to a question that was asked from our community that talked about CCTV and generative AI, because I think for the first time I might actually understand how my domestic alarm system works in my house in terms of how it identifies things and sends prompts back. So one of the uses that we are seeing is workplace monitoring, so camera monitoring, and obviously that has domestic application as well. So AI CCTV has analytical functions, so the voice detection, facial recognition, movements, traffic counting, and we're seeing that in a whole pile of applications, and there's been some literature review on that. And they are rule-based. So I think that's useful in terms of machine learning to predict what might happen next. And certainly we've got a client here who does some very, very amazing virtual reality training, where part of that training is that it assesses everyone that it trains using virtual reality and then puts together a set of a subset of data so that the next person who's training, if they miss a step, basically whispers in their ear and goes, you know, you forgot to close the hatch. So it can start to predict if there's a pause, someone's training and pauses, what they might be thinking about or what the next step might be. So there's useful pieces that we're seeing there. It comes back to privacy and data protection. I don't know how that's going to properly be regulated if it comes before the courts.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just, no, that's a good.
Sorry, Danny.
No, that's right.
Hey, that's a good point.
Oh, there we go, Stuart.
Yeah.
so we've got some questions.
The courts get really pissed
I
off.
can
with
actually.
generically
Eventually have cases,
generated.
the false cases pan out. Yes, we're watching with interest too. So that from a lawyer's perspective, the professional misconduct, if I use Australian terms, I'm saying this is an American case that we're looking at, the professional misconduct around presenting to a court and making representations to the judiciary about cases that you haven't fact-checked will give us all a case of the cold sweats and keep us up at night. But that will be very interesting. So there's two things there. There's obviously, it'll almost be a failure of the case, but the lawyer's in a lot of trouble. Legislation around consent and motion and emotional surveillance.
Stuart.
Well, I think, Stu, are you talking about potentially even like fatigue and all, related to those types of things in terms of managing people's, psychological states? Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you're capturing voice or even motions, like if you're walking in a certain way, does it indicate you're more fatigued? Or even, I know there's been a bit of work done around walking on platforms on train stations to see whether they're more likely to jump in front of a train through suicide. But what consent do we have to be able to do that? And from our perspective, more around emotion. So are there any psychosocial hazards at play? But do we have consent essentially? Well, what's the legislation around consent as to analyze people's emotions in that kind of facet?
I think the answer is none at the moment.
Well, I think, we do have a privacy law regime that gives some limited protection on the validity of how data collection and information can be used, but certainly not to probably adequately deal with that, the level of sophistication of the apps that we have now. And as I said, there is currently a privacy review, and these are all issues that are currently under discussion. And if they're affecting your business, I'd invite you, I can send you the link afterwards, but I'd invite you to make submissions while there is this current AI privacy review at the moment going on.
Yeah, that would be absolutely amazing.
The Coles Woolies situation is
That's from Cole.
Cole. Yeah, the Coles Woolworths sort of check what's in your basket while you're at the self-service checkouts is an interesting piece. So at the moment, basically the CCTV signs at the beginning, as you walk into the store, is almost an implicit consent that by stepping over the threshold, obviously all of the privacy legislation applies, but pardon? It has, after I was going to say, but there's been nothing that's been adapted to what we're seeing with the new technology. It's and Chris, my car tells me when it thinks I'm too tired, let alone just using it in the transport industry. It's I was just going to say, and apparently it can do that in the 5 kilometres on the way home late at night. So that's a little bit terrifying, or just a demonstration of my driving skills.
All right. Well, why don't we go to see if there's any other questions from the floor, because I think we're coming up on.
Coming up on 2.
Yeah. A few more minutes, and then Carolyn, can I get you to just go down on your audio, and I'll keep this one up for the moment. Okay. Right. So, guys, look, this has been a fascinating session, and no doubt you will all join me in thanking Joy and Carolyn for the incredible presentation in terms of detail and oversight. But we've still got a few more minutes to go to some open questions and discussion, if you'd like. So, if I
One from Stu.
Yeah, have we got another one from Stu down there?
No,
I know he's just saying thanks. He's got to jump off. Okay, yeah. So any other sort of further questions or discussion or queries to throw out there? I mean, Daniel, did you get your audio back on, and did we adequately answer that question in terms of that case?
No audio.
Still no audio. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I might just make an observation just while everyone's thinking about their next question, as it relates to the ability of
Thanks, Heidi.
generative AI to
Really
then create a voice replication. And so there has been some instances of fraud and scamming, mostly in the US at the moment, because if you have recorded your voice onto social media, and then the AI can actually replicate your voice in a phone call. And so there's a really interesting article that we will send out after today's session that provides more detail on that. But again, that's a little bit about some of the dangers of AI, and I think it's important that we don't just think of the dangers, that we actually think about how we can really use this, and really looking forward to seeing how the world continues to adopt this in a really positive way, because we believe the genie is out of the bottle.
I think another way you could look at it is you say, well, if the French words run into risk or run into danger, what about run into opportunity as a new way of thinking about AI? Because risk and opportunity are really just two sides of the same coin, and you can't get one without the other, unfortunately.
So this is why lawyers make bad business people.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say there's unanimous agreement on that comment. Yeah. I mean, Chris, you've been so quiet. Is there something wrong with your microphone?
Can you hear me now? I think
There you go. Yeah.
No, there has been. I've tried to chirp in with some very poor outcomes. So.
Oh, right. Okay. That's not like you.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to touch on where you were talking about the generation of policies and procedures. The court hates generic stuff, in my experience, and that's a very personal built-in by a judge experience. So my recommendation would be not to do it, but maybe use it as a template.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
good point, because I think given Kath had to jump off, but I think for a few of us that are either in and around that work health and safety profession, that's probably the preeminent sort of question. Well, certainly many of the clients in our world are asking about, like, what's it going to mean if ChatGPT writes me a policy on, like Stu was saying, on scaffolding or walking on elevated platforms that then leads to someone's death at work? Where's that going to land?
Well, we then have a chat about the size of the fine that your business is going to sustain and whether or not you have to go to jail as a result of it.
That's right. That's
my understanding, and Caroline, happy to be proven wrong or Joy here, is that you handed it over, so you're the one holding the can. You can't sort of turn around and go, "That was him."
Yeah, it was like
ChatGPT.
It was chatbot, Chris. It wasn't real.
That's
Chris.
right. So he can go and serve the 25 years for industrial manslaughter instead of me.
I know.
Yeah.
So which is coming, by the way. So just in case you're wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, I mean, New South Wales didn't adopt it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you probably need to put a yet on that. So.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. Or even more broadly, I think about, we've got, we live in this world of endless sort of legislative change being bombarded on us, and so we've got psychosocial code of practice now, we've got respect at work requirements. I'm sure people are trying to feed all of that sort of stuff into chatbots, because I mean, a lot of it just involves a lot of hard legwork that maybe organizations aren't resourced or wanting to do. And I just think that it just seems, considering all of the potential for hallucination, and even I don't know if anyone in the room or on the calls noticed it, it can't interpret sarcasm or satire, which means that it doesn't like me at all. And everything I feed it.
I don't like you at all.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I'm comfortable with that. Everything I feed it, like I've had some amazing one-liners in documents that I've put in there, and then it takes them out and it doesn't replace them with anything good. I was like, come on, have a crack. So
it's a robot, mate, no personality.
That's right. That's right. Don't talk about yourself like that, Chris. Yeah.
So Daniel's
Oh, right. No,
from Daniel to everyone, we've created a policy on the use of AI. Fantastic topic and discussion. Look forward to receiving additional material.
And you can't. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, so the chatbot can't get past my loud shirts. I feel like Chris is still yet to bring a shirt game that I feel like is really going to lift the level. I'm still rocking the what do you call it, the Lady Beetle shirts and the Mandala shirts. So
yeah, well, look, I'm just happy to find a shirt that fits around my neck, mate. So we need to keep the bar pretty low here, all right? and for those of you who met me, you'll understand what I mean. So
no, not at all, not at all.
So as usual, team, we will absolutely be sending everybody the slides and the recording from today, and the additional article that I mentioned around fraud and so on and so forth. And we sent you some articles earlier this week that are definitely worthwhile a read, including some articles from Australia around employers' take on whether they're banning or embracing the use of AI, and then some articles from the US as well. So enjoy the read, and
Yeah. I'll take it. Mute.
The only other thing I did want to mention, sorry, we've just got reverberation back here, is Dentons has a client experience program that's available to everyone, so not just Denton's clients, and we'll make sure the link gets circulated with the material, but two relevant upcoming seminars which are from our global network include one in November, which is actually called Creating an AI Strategy for Your Legal Team and Your Organisation, and that's presented by our team in the UK. So they'll have interesting insights, I would imagine, into their machine learning piece. And then in March of next year, I'm understanding that's a little while away, but the year's moving fast too quickly, we've got a seminar on the global key data privacy changes. So that's presented by one of our Australian partners, Robin Chatwood, as well as her global cohort. So we'll send the link to the whole client experience program. There's lots of things in there, including seminars on leading, managing, and implementing change, and whether your EQ is still relevant. So that we probably all need to go to that one. But they are available for everyone on the call to register for.
Yeah.
And I think, I can see, I know Brad, you're dialed in from site without video, but I think they're probably good ones as well for the broader TEAS team in Brisbane, and Daniel, yourselves, and any of the physically Brisbane-based guys. Yeah, it's a really easy office to access as well. Dentons, it's nice and central in town. So yeah, certainly give it some thought. Yeah. All right. Well, look, thank you so much again. And look, many thanks as once again to Joy and to Carolyn. Really appreciate yourselves making yourselves available and answering all the annoying questions everyone's been firing around.
Right. Thank you very much, guys. And everyone
Yep.
else, have a good rest of the day, good
Yep.
rest of the week. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah. All right. Chat to you
Take
soon.
care.
Bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.